The night my mother-in-law stood up at her own dinner table and said, quietly but without any hesitation, "Kira did not build that product." Every person in that room assumed she had finally run out of patience. She hadn't. At 68, Norma didn't run out of patience. She accumulated evidence and chose her moment with the precision of someone who had spent 30 years in commercial real estate, negotiating with people who thought she wasn't paying attention. I would learn later she had known for 6 weeks. We were at her house in Austin for what she had called a family dinner. My husband Troy had told Kira it was a company gathering. I'd been married to Troy for 6 years. Long enough to know which chair at Norma's table was mine. Long enough that no one asked anymore. Second from the left, by the kitchen window, next to him. I'd helped Norma pick the pendant light above that table at a HomeGoods on a Tuesday afternoon 3 years ago. I remember because we'd argued about the finish, and Norma had been right. Kira had been Troy's head of product for 2 years. Before that, she was a junior UX researcher at an outside firm Troy had hired during ClearPath Health's second product cycle. He brought her in-house after the engagement ended. She understands the space, he'd told me when I asked. She moves fast. I hadn't pressed him on what space exactly. She understood. By then, I was no longer formally inside the company, and asking questions about the people who had replaced me felt like something I wasn't allowed to do without a good reason. I had spent a long time not having good reasons for things. At Norma's table, Kira sat across from me. Slate blue blazer, dark hair loose, small gold hoops. Nothing obvious. She had the particular skill of crossing a line in a way that made you look petty for naming it. Troy had mentioned that afternoon she was coming. "She's presenting at the Series B meeting next month," he said, still looking at his phone. "Mom wanted to meet the team." Norma has never asked to meet anyone from ClearPath. She's more interested in the company now. I put down what I was holding. "Since when?" He finally looked up. "Since it started doing well. People pay more attention to things that are working." That tone. The one that made a normal question feel like a character flaw. I'd been learning to recognize it for years. The problem was I kept forgetting what I'd learned. By 7 o'clock, we were all seated. Troy's younger brother Ford was there with his girlfriend. Norma's sister Bet had driven in from San Marcos. 2 of Troy's college friends sat at the far end, and Kira sat across from me with a glass of white wine and a way of angling toward Troy that I'd started to notice about 6 months ago and had spent 6 months telling myself meant nothing. She and Troy talked through most of the salad course about the investor deck. She mentioned a projection. He critiqued it. She laughed at his critique and refined it, and he smiled. She knew which objections he would raise before he raised them. She knew because she spent more time with him than I did. I had let that happen. I was still working out how much of that letting had been mine. After the main course, Norma asked me to get a box of old photographs from the hall closet. She'd promised her sister she'd dig them out. 3rd shelf, blue lid. The closet was deep and crowded, and I had to move things around. I was gone maybe 8 minutes. When I came back to the dining room, I stopped. Kira was in my seat. Not leaning over it, not standing near it. Sitting in it, her jacket on the back of the chair. Her wine glass moved to my side of the table. A printed document spread open between her and Troy. She was angled toward him, one hand near his plate. My water glass sat in front of her with my lipstick on the rim. Bet looked at me first. Then Ford. Then Troy's college friend, who looked immediately at his wife, who looked at the wall. Nobody spoke. Everyone understood. Everyone was waiting for someone else to be the first to say it. I stood in the doorway holding a cardboard box of old photographs. Kira looked up. Something crossed her face. Not embarrassment, something quicker, more calculating, and then she smiled. "Oh, did you need to sit here?" As if she had simply not noticed. As if dinner table seating at someone's family home were a detail too minor to track. Troy glanced over his shoulder at me, frowned. "We're in the middle of something. There's room at the end." He tilted his head toward the 2 chairs pushed against the wall on the far side of the table. "Just sit there for a few minutes." I looked at the chairs. I looked at my husband. "You want me to move," I said. He exhaled in a way that made my name feel like a problem he'd already solved twice today. It's not a big deal. Kira touched the edge of the document. This really won't take long. Something went very still inside me. I had spent 6 years managing scenes before they became scenes. Protecting the evening. Being the one who swallowed things so other people could stay comfortable. And standing there, I looked around the table at all the people staring at their plates, and I understood. They were already uncomfortable. Troy had made them uncomfortable. The only person being asked to perform otherwise was me. "You're telling me," I said, slowly enough that there was no room for misinterpretation, "to give up my seat at your mother's dinner table." His jaw tightened. "Don't make this into something." I opened my mouth. I still don't know what I was going to say. I didn't get to say it. Norma's chair scraped back. She stood with the unhurried authority of someone who had never once needed to raise her voice to be taken seriously. "Kira did not build that product," she said. The room stopped. She looked at the document on the table. Then she looked at her son. The patient experience framework, the accessibility compliance model, the journey mapping system. Her voice was completely level. "Those came from Arden." Troy's face changed. "Mom, this is not. I'm making an observation. You're embarrassing everyone. I'm clarifying the record." She looked at Kira. "I don't imagine that's a comfortable thing to hear." Kira stood. "Mrs. Harlan, I want to be clear that I've substantially developed." Norma held up one finger. Kira stopped. "The absolute economy of it." One finger, I almost wanted to take notes. Norma looked at Troy. "Your wife left her seat to do something," I asked. "When she came back, you told her to sit in the corner." "We were looking at a document." "Then look at it somewhere else." "The investor meeting is in 3 weeks. This was urgent." "Is the building on fire?" He blinked. "ClearPath's building. Is it currently on fire?" "No." Then I remain unconvinced. She turned and looked at me with an expression I would think about for a long time. Not pity, not sympathy, just clarity. She picked up my coat from the sideboard and held it toward me. "Come on, sweetheart, let's go." Troy stood. "Mom, don't." "Sit down, Troy." "Arden, don't." I took my coat. His voice dropped to the register he used when he was most serious. "If you walk out of here, you need to understand what that means." I looked at him. For the first time in months, I looked at him directly, not around him, not past him, not in the careful, sideways way I developed to avoid the thing I'd see if I looked too straight. "Good night," I said. Norma drove a 10-year-old Volvo she refused to trade in, which Troy called a liability, and which, I was beginning to understand, she kept specifically to irritate him. I got in the passenger seat. For several blocks, neither of us spoke. My phone lit up, "Troy," I let it go. "He'll call until he decides you overreacted," Norma said. "How long does that usually take?" "About 40 minutes. Then the texts will start." I watched the streetlights pass. "How much do you know?" She was quiet for a moment. "About what specifically?" "About ClearPath. About what's been happening there." Her thumb tapped the steering wheel once. "I know the Series B deck presents the patient journey mapping system as proprietary methodology developed under the current product leadership." Something cold settled in my chest. "It wasn't developed under the current product leadership." "I know that. I read your original documentation, the research summaries, the grant application from 2020, the one that cited the accessibility compliance model." She glanced at me. "Your name is on all of it." Troy said the methodology had evolved. Systems evolve from foundations. That doesn't erase who built the foundation. I pressed my fingers against my knee. "Is this just about the deck?" Norma turned onto a residential street and slowed. "The company filed a provisional patent last quarter." I went very still. "For the patient journey mapping architecture," she said. "The one that is, as best I can determine, substantially derived from the system you developed in 2019. Before ClearPath Incorporated." "Yes." "My name isn't on the application." No, it isn't. The car was quiet for a long moment. He told me my original work wasn't directly applicable to the current technical build, I said. He said it had been abstracted too far. Norma pulled into her driveway and turned off the engine. She sat for a moment before she spoke. Arden. When a man starts rewriting his company's origin story, it's usually because the new version serves something he's already set in motion. I stared through the windshield. You think this is bigger than the deck? She opened her door. I think tonight is the first page you happen to see. I didn't sleep. I lay in her guest room until the sun came through the curtains, running back through 3 years of accommodations and asking which of them I had actually chosen. I had stepped back from ClearPath gradually, each step smaller than the last, each one explained as temporary. Troy needed support through the Series A. The engineering team worked late and he came home exhausted and asked me to handle the vendors. Just for a few months, just to take one thing off his plate. I had been a UX researcher. I knew the product at a level most of his team didn't. I thought stepping back was partnership. I had not understood that Troy was building an argument. Each time I attended a meeting, he frowned. Each time I sent notes on a product doc, his reply came late and said he'd pass it along. My access to the shared drive narrowed. My email address stopped receiving meeting invitations. 1 quarter I stopped being copied on supplier correspondence. The losses had been small enough, each one, to explain. Together they formed something I hadn't let myself name. At 9 in the morning I called Weston, a senior researcher who'd done market validation work for ClearPath early on, before Kira. We had worked together briefly during the original build. He answered quickly. The patient journey framework, he said when I asked. That came from you. You had a fully developed system before Troy incorporated. We treated it as the foundation. Did anyone ever suggest otherwise? He paused in a way I recognized. About 7 months ago, he said carefully, I got a call from someone doing investment diligence. They said Troy had represented the methodology as developed internally by the ClearPath product team. What did you tell them? The truth. I assumed Troy had already clarified things on his end. Arden, I'm sorry, I thought you knew. That sentence hit harder than anger would have. Everyone thought I knew. Everyone assumed my disappearance from the company had been mutual, agreed upon, my choice. Troy had made my erasure look like a decision we'd made together. I went home at noon. Troy was in the kitchen in yesterday's pants and a clean shirt, which told me he'd been home long enough to reconsider his wardrobe, but not long enough to sleep. The patent application, I said before he could start. Does it list me as an inventor? He set down his coffee. IP documentation reflects the current implementation. That's not what I asked. Arden. Yes or no? He looked at the window. The legal standard for inventorship is more nuanced than. I built the system in 2019. I have time-stamped files. I have the emails where I sent it to you. His face shifted. Not surprised, calculating. Concepts evolve. There's a distinction between an early framework and a patentable invention. Are you sleeping with her? The kitchen went silent. He turned his head slowly. That is completely. Are you? I'm not going to dignify that with. Troy, just say no. He looked at me. The look went on too long to be anything but an answer. He picked up his coffee mug, realized it was empty, set it down again. I think you need to talk to someone before we continue this conversation. I watched my husband straighten his collar and pick up his keys. The man who had called me from a parking garage before his first investor pitch, voice shaking, asking me to go over his deck one more time. The man who had sat on our kitchen floor the night the seed round closed, and said he didn't know how he would have done it without me. He had meant it then. I still believed he had meant it. I need you to leave, I said. He left. I found my external hard drive in the bottom of a moving box in the spare room. I opened it and sat there for a long time looking at what was inside. 3 years of research documentation. The original patient journey mapping files. Version histories. Drafts. Files dated in the fall of 2019. months before ClearPath Health existed as a legal entity. I photographed everything, backed it up 3 places. Then I called an IP attorney named Delia Cho, who had been recommended to me by a former colleague, and who, when I finished explaining, said, he spent money on a patent application before he bothered to check whose name was on the source material. That's going to be an expensive oversight. I liked her immediately. Norma had retained her own attorney days after the dinner. As a founding investor and advisory board member, she had rights to company documentation she hadn't previously exercised. She exercised them. The documents she received confirmed what she suspected. The patent application had been filed 11 weeks before Kira's official hire date, describing a system built on a framework completed and shared by email by me to Troy in 2019. Weston submitted a written statement. A former ClearPath engineer confirmed the timeline. 3 weeks later, I signed a lease on a small office in East Austin, 1 room. A folding table from Facebook Marketplace. A whiteboard. I called it Meridian UX. I put my research certifications on the wall in a single frame. My first call came through a published report from 2020, a health exos study that cited research I'd contributed to during the early ClearPath build. My name was in the acknowledgments section. A digital health director at a hospital network outside San Antonio had read it. He called to ask whether the framework described in the report could be adapted for their patient intake system. I told him I'd built it. He asked if I could start in 30 days. He did not ask who I was married to. Troy found out about Meridian through someone in the local health tech network. He called without a greeting. You're using ClearPath's methodology. I'm using mine. Those assets are documented as mine. 5 months before the company incorporated, I kept my voice level. Delia is happy to share the timeline. Silence. This is going to get out, he said. It's already out. I'm presenting at a regional conference in March. He exhaled hard. You're doing this to punish me. I thought about that honestly. I'm doing this because it's my work, and it turns out I'm still good at it. I hung up. My hand didn't shake. The Series B meeting happened 6 weeks later. Kira presented. 40 minutes in, the lead investor interrupted to ask about the origin of the patient journey mapping system. He had received a letter from Delia's office 48 hours earlier. Troy's brother Ford texted me that night. He says the meeting went off the rails. Then, a minute later, he says it's Kira's fault. Then, he says everything is Kira's fault. I feel like I've heard that story before, but with different nouns. I sent back a single response. How are you doing? He sent a thumbs up emoji and then, come to dinner sometime. The family table has space. Kira resigned in February. She had retained her own attorney. Troy called me the week she left. I answered once. She's telling the board I misrepresented the equity structure to her, he said. I understand how it feels to be told a story and discover later it wasn't true. He was quiet for a moment. That's not fair. Probably not. I looked at the whiteboard in my office, covered in client timelines. Take care of yourself, Troy. I hung up. The divorce was 8 months of paperwork and a 6-month detour where Troy contested the valuation of my pre-company research, which he simultaneously argued was worthless and foundational. Delia called this strategy internally contradictory. I called it a waste of everyone's time and said so, clearly, in mediation, in a way that apparently surprised his attorney. In the end, an acknowledgement in the patent record. A settlement that reflected my contribution to ClearPath's early formation. Licensing rights for the methodology through Meridian, without restriction. The day it was signed, Delia pushed the papers across the table and said, "That's it." I stared at them. That's it? Divorce is mostly paperwork once people run out of things to argue about. Norma brought wine to my apartment that evening. We sat at my kitchen table, and she raised her glass without any particular ceremony. Different accounting, she said. I looked at her. You've been calling it 6 years lost, she said. It wasn't lost. You invested it. He wasted what you invested. Those are not the same ledger. I didn't say anything for a moment, then I laughed. which made her look satisfied in the way she did when she'd landed something she'd been waiting to say. Meridian grew faster than I expected. By the end of the year, 4 full-time employees, clients across 3 states, a referral pipeline that had started from that 2020 report with my name in the acknowledgments. The one Troy had apparently forgotten existed. I hired a researcher named Zara. She was 26, relentlessly precise, and on her 3rd day told me a conversion assumption in one of my forecasts was off by roughly 15%. I checked, she was right. "You want accurate or you want comfortable?" she asked. "Accurate," I said. "Then I'll always tell you." That was the first time in years I'd hired someone specifically hoping they would push back on me. Norma became a formal Meridian advisor in the spring. She negotiated her own terms. A defined scope, quarterly fees, and observer seat on any future board structure. She informed me I would have a board eventually and that hedging about it was a waste of time. I didn't hedge. In March, I gave a talk at a women's leadership conference in Austin. The organizer had found me through a colleague. She introduced me by my name and by Meridian's name and described, briefly, what the company did. She did not mention ClearPath. She did not mention Troy. She did not mention the dinner or the patent dispute, or the 8 months of paperwork, or the morning. I stood in a doorway holding a box of old photographs and was told to go sit at the far end of the table. She said, "Please welcome our next speaker." I walked to the front of the room and sat down in the chair that had been set out for me. A placard on the table said my name, Meridian UX, founder. And I thought about another chair. A chair at a dinner table on a Saturday night, with my water glass in front of it, and my lipstick on the rim, and another woman sitting in the middle of my place setting, while my husband pointed toward the far wall and said, "Just sit somewhere else." I had been ready to go. I had been practicing disappearing for so long that going would have felt like reflex. Norma had stood up instead. She'd told me, weeks later, when I was still trying to understand how I had let it go so far. "He needed you to believe the place you occupied was his to give." The room was waiting, 100 people in their seats, looking at me. I thought about what it had cost me to understand the difference between a place someone assigns you and a place you've built. I thought about the research files on that hard drive, dated before the company existed. I thought about Weston saying we treated it as the foundation and me not understanding, for years, what that meant about what I was owed. I didn't need Troy to hand me a chair. I never had. The place I occupied had always been mine. He had simply been very good at making me ask permission to use it, and I had been, for a long time, very willing to ask. I looked out at the room. I straightened the placard with my name on it. Then I began.